when you start a game or when you start a company, it's important to find some niche or some area where you can be different and you can differentiate yourself. And if you go head to head, do exactly what the big established companies do, you have no chance.
Hi, I am Sophie Vaux, and this is the Rise and Play podcast. In the show, I sit down with influential thought leaders in the gaming industry to deconstruct how they create the best teams and company cultures in order to create the best games. Speaking to hundreds of game executives in the show, I have identified recurring patterns and mistakes that we all make in our leadership journey. Do you have to go through the same hurdles and make the same mistakes to learn too? You are not alone in this journey, and hopefully you can learn from a diverse range of seasoned leaders who already walked the talk. Every episode brings actionable insights and case studies that will help you improve your management skills, self-awareness, and empathic communication. Becoming a better leader starts with becoming a better human. Are you ready to unlock your full potential in life and business? Let's begin. All right, we are here in a setup in my back garden for this new series for Rise and Play, because I wanted to have more in-person interview, and I'm so pleased to have Jens in my backyard in Berlin, to have like also a very cozy setup and interview here. Like it's in summer, it's very silent, very green. And so we start today to talk about the journey of Wooga and your journey, Jens, over the past 10 years. And also for the context, I joined Wooga in 2013, early 2014. And among all the companies I've joined, it's one that is still like very close to my heart on, you know, my own experience, people I met there, you as well, and how I grew actually in the company to be where I am today. So Rise and Play is also a bit like a result of my times at Wooga. So welcome today. Jens.
Yeah, thank you for the invite, Sophie. And I'm very, very glad you remember Wooga positively, and very nice to be here today with you.
But before we start, because although like for me, it's also, I've known your story as well, where you were very sharing back in the days at Wooga, very close to the people. So I feel like I've known you, and I would say it's not a given in all the companies I've been part of where I could say I have known the co-founder or the CEO closely. So I'll give a bit of like few key facts of who you are, Jens, as an introduction, and we can go more into that as we talk. But for the people who don't know Jens Begemann, he's the founder of Wooga, and a few key facts as well. Like before you founded Wooga in 2008 and early 2009, you grew up in a farm in Germany, so coming as well like from Germany, the countryside. And the interesting fact as well I remember you were sharing is that because you were kind of more like countryside farm, you were very interested in tech, you know, in computer, and trying to play and have fun with the games you had at the time, which were not so many available. And you started at 10-year-old to teach yourself how to code and make the games that you wanted to play, basically, right?
Yeah. It was 1987. I was 10, and I really wanted a games computer, like a Commodore C64. Some of my friends had one, and some of the rich kids even had an Amiga, and I wanted one of these. And my parents said, no games computer, this is not good for you. So I got a very old Apple II, which back in the day, I think it was already like a 10-year-old machine, not very capable, and very few games available for this, just 48 kilobytes of memory, and just dark green on light green screen. So I teach myself how to code in BASIC and wrote some extremely simple games, so I had something to play.
And later as well, you studied business administration in Berlin, had internships in large corporation, which was not what was Wooga, like Siemens. And I think the first professional experience that later led to the foundation of Wooga was when you were 24, and it was 2001 at the time, and joined a startup called Jamba. I remember seeing Jamba ads actually on TV, and in the US and UK it's called Jamster.
So some of you may remember the crazy frog.
Yes, exactly.
I'm sorry for that.
So that's an interesting one, because you were 24 and you you already had a vision very clear that you wanted to learn about startup to build your own startup. How did that realization come, like that motivation?
So I was always into entrepreneurship. So as I said, as a teenager, I was coding. We, with some fellow co-founders, we had the ambition when we were 16, 17, hey, we can write and create our own games. So we came together. I was doing the coding, somebody else was doing the graphics, and we had the ambition to create our own PC game, which was way too ambitious back then. And then when I was 18, I got a license to basically have a small business on the side to school to sell computers and do some network installation. And when the year 2000 came, at the end of university, we talked to a professor and said, hey, you know, we have this course with you, but could we maybe skip the course and instead write a book? So our idea is, hey, our group of 40 students, we will write and publish and print a book in the next 12 weeks. And we will have a big day where we present all of the findings, and it will be about our life in 20 years. So Vision 2020, that was the goal. And so we basically, from an entrepreneurship style, kind of started this group of students and wrote the book, published it, had a big day of presenting it. And so kind of this entrepreneurship drive I always had in me. And then late 2000, early 2001, I had the idea, okay, I start my own company.
Already?
But by the year 2001, the dot-com bubble had burst.
Yeah.
So it was basically almost impossible to get money. I had no idea what company really I wanted to start.
Yeah.
I had no co-founder, and I had no idea how a startup works. So basically I knew nothing.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, to fulfill my dream of starting a company, starting a startup, I first need to learn how it works. So I ran around Berlin and tried to find a young startup that would take me on as a young fellow.
And that's very wise, because a few things you mentioned that are actually quite, I would say, solid foundation to start a company. I'm not saying that you should have all the knowledge because you don't know what you're building until you're building it. But having a network, if you are looking for co-founders, for sure, having clarity and vision of why you want to build a company and what you want to do. So coming to the conclusion of learning, and in the end you learn for 7 years, although you intended to learn for a few years and build your company.
My goal was 2 to 3,
Yeah.
and then Jamba grew so quickly and changed so much, and I stayed for 7.
Yeah, I guess it was then that fun that you stayed that long as well.
It was, I mean, the company shifted multiple times. It was sold. I got more responsibility, and in the end, because always something was changing, I felt, okay, I'm not done learning yet.
Yeah.
And I could not fully identify with the trajectory the company was taking, mostly focused on ringtones, but I had already responsibility for games, mobile games back then. We had a small game studio at Jamba. So I always was learning. So I stayed, but in 2007, 2008, I felt, okay, maybe it's over now, it's enough, and I resigned after 7 years.
Okay. What was the point where you decided, okay, I go all in, I resign, I start a company? I don't know if at the time you talked to people that could be your co-founders. How did you make that transition?
Yeah, so I had a 6 months notice period.
Oh wow! This
Yeah. It's
German employment.
So yeah, I was at Jamba. I had a team of, I think, 120 people, and Jamba at the time was like 500, 600 people, and my team was 120. And I had a 6 months notice period, and I came to the realization, okay, I want to start my own company now. So I resigned in February of 2008, and I knew I had kind of 6 months. And during that time, I got married and was more focused on my private life. And then after 6 months, I was free. And only at that point, I started thinking about what I really wanted to do. So from my savings, I knew I could probably last 1 to 2 years without a salary.
That's good.
Without a salary. And I had some money to invest to kind of fund the first few months of a company. And I talked to a lot of people. I traveled to Silicon Valley. I remember I was in Los Angeles, actually sleeping with a sleeping mattress on the floor at a friend when he turned on CNN. Oh, Lehman Brothers collapsed. That was the Monday in September back then. So, and then the week thereafter, there was this news of, oh, no more funding for startups and the startup world is going down. So I traveled around, met lots of people, talked to lots of people to realize for myself, okay, after now 7 years, what do I want? What do I want to do? What kind of company do I want to create? And it became clear to me quite quickly, okay, I want to do something. It was not clear it was games. So my idea was, okay, I want to do something consumer focused, direct to consumer, probably around entertainment, because that's what I know and what my passion is. And then after some time I realized, well, actually it's games, right? I'm 31 now, back at the time I started coding games when I was 10. I had loved computer games all my life. That's what I want to do. And then I met, through a friend, I met one of my co-founders, Patrick, and then had a few months later actually, a call with somebody I met at Jamba, Philip. That's how us three got together. And the idea for us back then was, okay, can we make games more mass market, make them more broad? Because the games industry back then was already huge, but the vast majority of players was gamers.
Yeah.
Like
PC.
PC and console, more men than women, typically younger. So the stereotypical gamer was a male teenager, right?
Yes, yeah.
And I thought, okay, well, in terms of revenue, the games industry is huge, but in terms of audience, it's relatively small, right?
Yeah.
And I believe the desire to play is in us. We have it as kids and as adults. Society trains us to lose it, but it's still in us as adults.
Totally.
And okay, why is everybody listening to music every day? Everybody is watching some form of video or TV every day. I think everybody should play every day. That was the idea, and that was the vision for Wooga. Everybody plays every day, and that's how we started, and basically met end of 2008, and then formally incorporated in January of 2009.
Then let's start, as you started Wooga 2008-9, and started with, well, I don't know if it was Facebook games or social network games. Could you give more of a context at the time, how you started to jump on it? And one of the games that was like the first success of a company, Brain Buddies, in 2009, with a viral growth of 6 million MAU. My God, I think many people would dream for those numbers today. And with no marketing budget, it's impossible today. Like when I was like writing this down, like this is quite different today.
But no revenue, zero revenue.
How did you start? Where you said like the funding wasn't there, you had put your savings. Who developed the game, and did you bootstrap at the time?
Yeah, well, we as co-founders, we put our savings into the company. So we said, okay, we can live without a salary for probably a year. And we had about 150,000 euros, which was quite a bit of money from our savings, from everybody. Kind of, we were not 20 at the time. We had savings, and nobody owned any apartment or building or anything. We were just renting, and nobody had a car. So we had 150,000 euros and no salary for a year, which is quite a bit. I would say in terms of purchasing power, Berlin was much cheaper back then. So that's equivalent to like having 300,000 euros today. And so that was quite a bit. And well, our goal, we looked at the landscape, and initially we wanted to create just a game on our own website. But then we realized, okay, social networks are actually growing much faster, and that's the better platform to be on. But we realized our competition is 1.5 to 2 years ahead. Zynga was already out 1.5, almost 2 years. Played and Playfish was there. So we said, okay, on Facebook we have no chance. But there are all of these local social networks. So Facebook has won the US, but in all of these other countries, somebody else is number one. Orkut was the leader in Brazil, and StudiVZ was the leader in Germany, and every country had their leading social network. And it was not clear that Facebook would win. So we said, okay, we build our game and we go to all of these other social networks. But as we were building Brain Buddies and we were progressing, we did some work internally, and we worked with a Polish studio called Fabryka Gear, which did a large part of the work. So we did the design, they did most of the coding and graphics and sound. We were progressing, and these APIs of these other social networks were not progressing. There was no platform to launch on. StudiVZ was not ready, Orkut was not ready, nobody was ready. And therefore we said, okay, well, yeah, we don't want to wait. We put it out on Facebook on July 1st, 2009. And we see how it goes there, and then we use all of those learnings to bring it to these other social networks. And I think one growth advantage for us was most of these other games were only available in English, and we launched in 8 languages right from day one. And we had 8 country managers, which were summer interns. So we had a lady from Turkey, a young student in her early 20s. We had a guy from France, etc., right? And we gave each of these 20, 21-year-old people 1,000 euros. So we had a marketing budget. It was 1,000 euros per language. And said, okay, with these 1,000 euros, do as much as you can. And we had a 20-year-old intern, head of country management Italy,
hey,
right?
wow.
That was the title. And they were there for 3 months. And the Brain Buddies was designed around virality. Back then, you could get free viral growth on Facebook. Facebook was not yet a public company, and they didn't need to make huge amounts of money and profit, so they gave out virality quite freely. And within 4 months, we had 6 million monthly active users, and we had days with over 100,000 installs, and all free viral growth, but no revenue. But it was a lot of fun and strong growth. And this momentum allowed us to talk to venture capital investors and gave us the funding that then allowed us to build the next few games for the next 2 years.
I think it's inspiring to hear again about those days, because we hear a lot how difficult the times are, where again funding are not available like this, and companies like, oh my God, I can't start without any funding. But 10 years ago, where there was even less, I would say, resources available and the tools we have, it's a good reminder that there are other ways actually bootstrapping your business, and it constraints, like you said at the beginning, it forces you to focus. What is it like you really need to do to get to the next stage?
And I think when you start a game or when you start a company, and you have very few resources, much fewer resources than anybody else, it's important to find some niche or some area where you can be different and you can differentiate yourself. And back then on Facebook, it was this time where you could get viral growth with a game like Brain Buddies, and 6 months later it would not have been possible. Actually, 3 months later it would not have been possible. So
there was
timing is extremely important. And I actually don't know what the market niche is today, but if you as an entrepreneur find it, you can get strong growth. If you go head to head, do exactly what the big established companies do, you have no chance.
Yes, exactly. And I'm curious here because, again, I reflect on those times where these days when companies receive funding, I've seen different examples where you scale very quickly, you push or you, instead of focusing on growing your existing assets, you go jump on the new ones. How did you spend that money at the beginning when suddenly you had money?
So
how did you approach it?
I think back in 2009 we spent the money wisely. Then later, around 2014, 2015, I'm sure we will come to that later, when we had even more money, we spent it very unwisely. So 2009, we continued, Brain Buddies, so we got the money in the bank, I think October 22nd, and Brain Buddies had an all-time peak on November 1st, so just a week later, because Facebook changed its algorithms and our user numbers dropped to half within 2 months. So our first board meeting was not nice. But we had the money in the bank, right? But our first board meeting was, okay, Brain Buddies numbers are cut in half. Your game number 2, Bubble Island, is delayed. Your game number 3, Monster World, is delayed. It was, not good, not nice. But how did we spend the funds? So we tried to basically prevent Brain Buddies from collapsing with a few employees working on that, and we hired relatively quickly. I think at the end of year one, we were about 15 employees and 15 interns. And then at the end of year two, we were about maybe 40 to 45 employees and maybe 20 interns. So relatively quick growth in terms of headcount. Basically 30 headcount at the end of year one and 60 at the end of year two. And what we did is, after Brain Buddies, we started development of 2 games, and then quite quickly thereafter game 3. So we had Bubble Island, Monster World, and a game called Happy Hospital by Sebastian Nussbaum, which did not become a success. Later his games became huge successes, but this one was not a success. And we stayed focused on Facebook, but we said, okay, we want to also have in-app purchases for the very first time. We want to have some monetization, and okay, how can we make game number 2, game number 3?
And as you started to scale the company, because that question comes often as well among the priorities of founders as they scale, did you spend some time in reflecting on how you wanted to scale your team, your hires, your company culture, even structure, ways of working, or you just hired at the time focusing on the game launch?
Yeah, so I had very, very clear ideas on the importance of company culture and certain aspects of company culture and how we wanted to run things at Wooga. And those came from this belief that as a young company, basically, one of the very few differentiators you have is who do you hire and how well do these people work together, right? Because you don't have a brand, you don't have intellectual property, you don't have patents, you don't have factories, machines, huge customer base, you don't have nothing of this. So who you hire and how they work together is probably your most important asset. And in terms of company culture, I had learned some things at the corporate at Siemens, because I had spent a few years there, even though just as an intern, but a few years there, then 7 years at Jamba. And in my mind, I had basically thought of, okay, what are the things I want to do exactly the same? And what are the things that I want to do the exact opposite?
Yes.
And I wanted to create an environment where everybody was kind of taken seriously, no matter how junior you are, where everybody was well respected, where there is an open culture of communication, where every learning is shared without kind of personal kind of accusations, right? Instead of saying, hey, you did this wrong in Brain Buddies, it's more of, okay, based on the numbers, this doesn't seem to work so well. What about this idea? To have an open discussion where everybody can contribute ideas. That was at least the goal. And one goal was also, as we were growing quickly, to ensure we have really good onboarding. There's a plan for your first week. What will you do? Who will you talk to? Who's maybe your buddy who helps you familiarize yourself with the culture? We had a starter checklist already pretty early on. This is what you should do on your first 5 days. Onboarding sessions, we did that basically from day one, where once a month I sat down with every employee and gave them an hour of the history of Wooga. Why are we here? What are we doing? What is important? And later we expanded that to, I think, 5, 6, 7 onboarding sessions, right, with the head of engineering, head of marketing, etc. So that even if you work in marketing, you'd learn some of the basics of engineering and the other way around, and not just those two, but just as examples. So those were aspects that were important to us from day one. And one aspect was also, we didn't want to be a German startup. We wanted to be an international startup based in Berlin. So we did English as our company language from day one, which is normal now, but in 2009 it was unusual. Those were some of the thoughts we put into basically the company culture early on.
Before we managed to talk about it now, there were a lot of intentions, and I can tell you, like, I joined in 2014, early 2014, and those have actually translated quite well in what you just described. I think, like, the choice of language, for example, to be very intentional, and it's not easy where you have a whole team in German and suddenly say, we have to speak English. I know that even among French, it was strange to each other to speak English, but it's a commitment where there was also the vision of, if we want to be a global international company, we have to behave international. And I think like also the thinking around what are our assets as a company when we don't have any like hardware or properties. It's the people, and focusing really on being deliberate on our ways of working and who we are hiring. This is something that it makes a lot of sense after, for me, having experienced the culture at Wooga. And I wanted also like to reflect back on like as a feedback as well on how I experienced the culture. I was coming from Gameloft before I joined. I remember we had conversation, and that openness and respect to each other and that open communication culture, it was unusual in games at the time. Especially, I was coming from a company where it was a hierarchical structure, there's status, and you don't get to talk to everyone the same way, and there are different values of people based on your title or your experience. And so for me, it was very refreshing actually to join a company structure that was so lean, based on your output, your contribution, instead of like who you are, how you look.
Yeah, yeah, and you can't completely eliminate hierarchy and power and structure and things like this, and you shouldn't.
Yes.
But at least that was our goal, that everybody can contribute. And as the company gets older and bigger and more mature and more established, back then we didn't know what direction we would take next year. Now, I'm sure after a few years later, Wooga is now turning 15 in January. So I think you need to have a little bit more structure.
Yeah.
When you have found your role and you found your place and you found your focus, then you probably need a bit more structure.
And we'll get to that as well, like after the acquisition of Playtika, as we go through the journey. It's like Wooga is like a bit like a kid going to teenage age and maturing. I think it's kind of the same.
And then marrying Playtika.
Yes, very young, still like also like maturing. So fast forward, after like you had as well like Diamond Dash. I also worked on that game, still a great IP, and I had a lot of fun with the team and the panda character from Diamond Dash. And the other Facebook games, I came at a time as well where I had experience from Gameloft with mobile development, and I wanted to hear from you, when did that transition become clear that you had to also be present on mobile? Because it implies several things, which is also different skills, because it's not the same platform like PHP web development to native, painful transition, but also team structure, ways of working. I remember when I joined Diamond Dash, there were two teams. One, like Facebook, like PHP, and one as well mobile. So how was for you that time of transition, and when it became deliberate, like we are going as a mobile company?
Yeah, so we started as a social games company on Facebook, and the App Store launched in 2008, and even by 2009, nobody in their mind would consider really that it's a good idea to start a mobile games company. So I remember in the summer of 2009, we were pitching at a venture capital venture capital firm, and we were presenting our plans and what we wanted to do on Facebook. And one of the partners asked us, hey, do you have any plans to go to mobile, right? It's September of 2009, over 1 year after the launch of the App Store. I said, well, no, actually, focus is really important to us. We want to stay on focus. We want to stay on Facebook. And he said, oh, God, thanks, God. Thanks, God, you stay on Facebook, because there's absolutely no money to be made on mobile games.
Wow.
September 2009. And then 1.5 years later, it was early 2011, I had this impression, well, actually, mobile games is growing quite quickly. And Apple had made a huge change at the end of, or during 2010, where you could have a free app but still have in-app purchases. Before that was not allowed. You could only do in-app purchases when you already paid initially for the game. And that created quite a bit of growth in 2010 on mobile games. And I thought, okay, we need to do something there. We have a great business on Facebook, but there's a trend here on mobile, and we didn't know what to do. And Facebook back then had a huge project where they said, okay, these apps on phones, that's kind of intermediate period, like it was on PCs in the 80s and the 90s, but then starting the 2000s, programs and apps on your computer mostly disappeared. Everything moved to the browser. Yeah. And you don't have a Gmail app, you go to gmail.com. The same for Google Docs, Google Sheets, everything else. So the vision from Facebook was, hey, everything will move to HTML5 and everything will move. to the browser. But the other big thing, obviously, was the App Store. So I think around the time, I don't know how many people we were, maybe 150, 200, 150, my guess. I don't know exactly anymore. We said, okay, we don't know what route it will be, but we will do both. So we put a small team, I think it was around 5 people, on an HTML5 game, and we put around 5 people on a native iOS game. And the HTML5 game was a game called Magic Island. And the iOS game, we had just launched Diamond Dash in March of 2011. And shortly thereafter, we said, okay, let's do a mobile version. And HTML5, it's probably because everything is so fast, it's so action-packed, you only have 60 seconds.
Right.
People do hundreds of taps in those 60 seconds. Probably you need native. So we had one 5-people team working on this native Diamond Dash and one working on this maybe summer of 2011. Yeah, summer of 2011. And we had already started the HTML5 game maybe in spring 2011. And then around September, October, the HTML5 game launched. And it became clear within about 2 months that it's a flop. And the main reason was people didn't find their way back to it. So the initial friction to start the game was lower, right? It was much cheaper and much easier to get people to start the game because you didn't have to install anything. You were not redirected to the App Store. And the actual user experience of playing the game was also actually fine, I would say. And retention, first session usage numbers were pretty good. But then nobody came back because they left their browser.
Yes.
They didn't remember the URL. They didn't remember where to go back to. Nobody came back because you didn't have the icon on the home screen. And so it was less about technology and more about user experience. And it became relatively clear around November, this is probably not working. We would need a fundamental change in how to get people back to this. And in December of 2011, we launched Diamond Dash, and we had a very strong Facebook integration. So we had the desktop game, the Facebook.com game, which I think was getting to tens of millions of users at that point. And then we launched mobile, and it was viral growth, and both fed each other. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but in early 2012, spring 2012, maybe 5 million daily active users on Diamond Dash. Maybe it was more. As a company in total, we had over 10 million daily active users.
Yeah, that's huge.
It's much less revenue than today.
Yeah.
So revenue per user was very, very low.
Yes.
But over 10 million daily active users, and I think in terms of daily and monthly active users, we were in the top 3 back then, worldwide. Yeah, so huge viral growth, but we hadn't understood yet how to monetize. But we had understood huge viral growth. But on the topic of mobile, what had worked really, really well, we were not distracting this 150 people organization. They continued to work on their Facebook games, and they brought in revenues, so to pay the bills for the 150 employees. And we had this 5-people team here with HTML5 that failed, not because of the team, because of the environment wasn't ready. And this other 5-people team making this native iOS app, that was a huge success. And as a result of that, in early 2012, I decided, okay, we need to do more. So we need to do an Android version of iOS, and we need to kick off a few more new games. And we started working on Bubble Island for mobile. We started working on Monster World for mobile. So the initial goal was to bring our Facebook games to mobile. And then by the middle of 2012, I made an announcement to the company of, hey, we are a mobile games company now. Shortly after that basically decision and announcement, the work, Florian Steinhoff started working on Jelly Splash.
That was the first mobile
which then launched 1 year later in 2013. So yeah, that was the idea. And because of this experiment, 5 people here, 5 people there, we were 6 months ahead of our Facebook competitors who were later to make similar steps. But this 6 months head start was the reason why we were really successful in 2013 and 2014. And after that, we went into crisis, but that was for different reasons.
Yeah. And I remember, like now I also try to put in my own timeline where I joined at the time 2014. when I took over Diamond Dash, actually the mobile revenue were growing, well, at least growing better than the ones that were declining on Facebook. So there was already the transition of platform when I took over the game. So I could, but it was unclear at the time, whereas like both are like very valid. And I remember it wasn't that obvious that mobile would be the main thing and Facebook slowly would die. But it was a good call, like something I take away as well. Like it was less than 5% of the staff, I would even say, that were dedicated, and it was R&D initiative very early, like small cost, quickly get some answers, and like how do we start the initiative?
Yeah, and we did something later, very similarly when Apple Watch launched. We had a 5-people team. We had a 5-people team doing smartwatch games. And that in the end didn't work out, right? I mean, I would say even today, there's no successful game for Apple Watch. But we had 5 people working on this for 1.5 years. And the goal again was small investment, small risk. And if it takes off, we are early, because in the early days of a platform or in the early days of a trend, time is more important than the number of people you have on it, because it's new anyway and you cannot work on it with a lot of people anyway. So let's say virtual reality or augmented reality, Apple Vision Pro, that is launching in 2024. If I was a company now and it's even remotely kind of, I think there would be a fit, I would have a 5-people team working on this for the next 2 years to see if it takes off or not.
To be ready in case you need to do the transition.
Yeah, so when the platform takes off, you're ready and you have a 6 to 12 months head start compared to people who only start working on this now.
Yeah.
You can do that if you have a few dozen people, then you can afford the 5, right?
Yes.
If you're a 10-people startup, you shouldn't dedicate half of your staff. But maybe you can have 1 or 2 people on the experiment, right? I saw your podcast with Michael Martinez from Funcraft, who said, well, basically one of our engineers created this word Yahtzee game, right? So they are doing experiments with very little resources.
Let's jump now to another phase of the company I've been part of as well, although I couldn't follow it until the end. I remember when I joined also at the time, it was very exciting. So I was also later working on Jelly Splash, great first mobile launch. So for me, my vision of Wooga was really a casual puzzle company, and that was. And then we started to do different type of games, experimenting, racing games. There was a mid-core studio, Black and Gold, with Warlords. What was the thinking at that phase where we were exploring several genres, and maybe the key learnings, and how long that phase?
The main issue was there was little thinking. So. As I just said, kind of these small experiments, having 5 people here, 5 people there, had worked really, really well. And it was the end of 2013, so basically exactly when you joined, and we were basically a little bit drunk by success. We had launched Pearl's Peril, a hidden object game on Facebook, doing really well. Monster World was still strong, Diamond Dash was still strong, and Jelly Splash had launched on mobile and was our biggest hit, I think, in terms of revenue ever. We felt everything we touched turned into huge success. So we had this arrogance that everything we would do would turn into a hit. And there was this big desire from many people inside the company, okay, we want to do real games, right? For the PC, for console, mid-core, hardcore, games for gamers. So we went into this direction of, okay, basically every game team, we start lots of new game teams, and every game team can decide on their own what route they want to take. And what happened was that within a year, just maybe 20%, 30% of the company was working on our live games, on our existing games. And 70 to 80% of the company was working on new games, and the vast majority of these new games was outside of our comfort zone, outside of casual. And we were doing, like you said, a turn-based strategy, real-time strategy, third-person shooter, racing, sports, everything, right? Role-playing, everything. At one point we had 18 new games in development in terms of prototypes and games in production. And we were growing to 250, I think 300, 320 people. And I mean, to cut a long story short, none of this worked. And I didn't put constraints. I gave all of this freedom to the teams, and I should have put constraints. I should have said, okay, maybe half of the company works on new games, half of the company works on our live and existing games. And in terms of our new game development, we maybe put a third into new experimental genres. That would have been right. And we should have carefully chosen, okay, what would be the right genres? Or we could have just gone for one genre, and then when it didn't work, maybe do a second experiment. Because what we did was, people were working on a role-playing game. Okay, that didn't work. Let's do a racing game next. Let's do a shooter after that.
Yes, not carrying on the learnings.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, we didn't carry on learnings. And so that was clearly my mistake, because I didn't make a conscious decision. I even gave, I think, an announcement that we are still mostly casual. What kind of strategy is that, right? We're mostly casual, but we're open to other genres without any constraints. And what happened was, we made this decision at the end of 2013. And 2014, commercially, revenue-wise, we still saw big growth. Because a strategic decision, or in my case, a lack of a decision, it takes time until that manifests in the results. And because of our casual games, Jelly Splash, Pulse Peril especially, 2014 commercially was still a really big success. And then 2015, we were drunk by money. We had a bank account of, I think, 27 or 28 million euros sitting on our bank account. We had conversations in the boardroom of, oh, we have all of this money, where do we put it, where do we spend it, right? We need to put it out, we need to invest it. And we did crazy decisions on approving even more new game development and crazy marketing budgets on Agent Alice, hidden object game. I think we spent, the game was clearly not ready for launch, but we thought we needed to put it out, and we spent, I think, 7 million euros on marketing in 2 weeks with a game that didn't have a proper soft launch before. We were really drunk. And then in 2015, that led, we had declining revenue, we had crazy spending, and we were making losses. So we went from a point where I think maybe 2014 we were making 500 to 800,000 euros in profit per month, to 500,000 euros of losses per month.
Oh, it's scary numbers too.
And these losses grew, and the losses were increasing. And our bank account that was at 1.27 had gone to 20, 15, 14, 13. Every month it was going down. And only by the end of 2015, I realized, so 2 years after my lack of decision to focus, to put any constraints, I realized, okay, we're heading in the wrong direction. And 70% of the company is working on things that are not right. We should put more resources on our live games. We should focus our development on casual, and all of these other genres are not working. And it took us basically from that point, from my realization, 8 months to change back course. So I made quite a bit of announcements already and decisions at the end of 2015 in terms of cutting projects, but a number of projects still continued, like Warlords, for example, because it was in soft launch already, it was promising, it was a turn-based, hexagon turn-based strategy game. We thought, oh, well, maybe that could work, right? So we tried to separate that into a separate sub-studio so that the culture could be a little bit different and they would have breathing room. And we cut a number of other projects, some still continued. And then by August 2016, Warlords had not been the success that we thought it was. So we had made the decision to shut down Warlords, and we were still losing, I don't know exactly, but over 500,000 euros per month, maybe close to 1 million euros per month. I don't know exactly the numbers anymore. And I made the decision, okay, we have to lay off people, right? We're too big. So we laid off 42 employees, plus released freelancers, plus some people left voluntarily, because whenever you do layoffs, it puts a huge downer on morale. So people left voluntarily, and a few months later, we had laid off 42, but I think the company had reduced kind of staff by about 80 when you move from this phase of hype to kind of 2 years of downward trend and then layoffs, probably half of the people you lose are your people you actually lay off, and the other half is freelancers you stop working with because their daily contract is too expensive, and people leaving voluntarily. And we had made the decision to focus back on casual already by the end of 2015, and then the layoffs in August 2016. But then in 2017, there was still no success. We were still losing hundreds of thousands of euros per month. And our revenue was at least stable, so not shrinking anymore, but not growing, right?
Yes.
And then in 2017, basically our management team fell apart. We had gone through 3 years of crisis, right? Because all of these decisions we made, we focused back on casual in 2016. It was a year had passed.
Yeah.
We didn't see the results yet, which in hindsight I know it's normal, because if you change focus so much, it takes a year or longer until you see it actually in your results. But we had management meetings where I would summarize the conversations. At the beginning of the meeting was, hey, we're all sitting in the same boat, right? You are maybe focused on marketing, you're focused on finance, you're focused on technology, I'm focused on product. But then 10 minutes later, and we're all sitting in the same boat, right? You're focused on different things, but we're all sitting in the same boat. And 10 minutes later, the conversation was, yeah, we're all sitting in the same boat, but your side of the boat is sinking.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
It's because of our product, it's because of our marketing, it's because of our whatever. And we had run out of bond and stamina. So at the end of 2017, our management team had broken up. I felt alone. There was a phase where we were still losing money. There was a phase where in the next 12 weeks I lost 12 kilograms of weight because I mostly stopped eating. And it turned out that we were able to turn it around then. So our decision to focus back on casual was finally showing up in the numbers. June's Journey as a new game had launched that became a huge success at the end of 2017. I formed a new leadership team, mostly people who had worked for Wooga for many years, who were promoted. One external hire on the CFO side, but everybody else internally promoted in all roles. And 2018 became our biggest growth ever and our most successful year in terms of revenue growth ever. And then at the end of 2018, we sold to Playtika. So basically, kind of, if you summarize Wooga, 5 years of crazy growth at the beginning, then 3 years of crisis, and then 1 year, 1.5 years of rise and exit to Playtika.
Yeah, that's a ride, and the way you share it is very humble. So I'm very also inspired and touched by like the up and downs. And here you really took the time to explain as well what led to this. And I can empathize where it's very uncomfortable to see you losing 1 million every month. And at some point, it's just like going bankrupt if you don't do something.
Yeah, we were clearly on the path to bankruptcy.
Yeah,
we were probably still a year away from it.
Yeah.
In 2016, and
so it's still a year to react.
But if you don't move, if you don't do anything, and then with the layoffs, we didn't become profitable again. We just reduced our losses, so we turned from bankrupt in 1 year to bankrupt in 2 years.
Yes, yeah. So saving time.
Just getting a little bit of time, but after then, nothing. The turnaround didn't happen. That is also one of the biggest learnings, how important strategy is and strategic direction. And if you make a strategic turn to a different direction, how long it takes until that manifests in. I very, very, very much underestimated the importance of strategy. I thought, from my corporate background, I thought strategy was useless, high-paid people sitting somewhere in an office making presentations about strategy that have no connection to the actual day-to-day operation of the company. But I realized that strategy is really, it's about what you are doing and what you're not doing, what you're focusing on, what is your differentiator compared to others. And choosing that is extremely important, because employees can only, when do employees produce healthy, good output? You need 3 things. you need to have good people. They need to work in an environment where they can work collaboratively and well with others, and they need to run in the right direction.
Yeah.
And if just one of these three things is not there, you're not producing good output.
Yeah.
And you really need all three. You need the high quality employees, you need the right environment so that they don't fight against each other in a political way or that it's unhealthy or toxic. And they need to run in the right direction. And the last one, it took me a very long time to realize how important that is. The first two were obvious to me, but the last one, and I think things like, hey, let's experiment on mobile HTML5, let's experiment on iOS, let's experiment on Apple Watch, kind of putting small kind of touches out to figure out what the next big trend may be is a good idea. And if you have a small company, if you have a startup, you need to bet. If you have just 10 people, you need to bet your company in one direction. And if it doesn't work out,
it's your bullet, your company.
Yeah, it's your bet.
And let's get at last on the acquisition with from Playtika.
Yeah.
And I never had the chance to also to ask, but back now so to the early days when you founded Wooga, where did you have in mind like the strategy of exit for the company and how Playtika was a match at the time or for where the company was headed?
Yeah, so it was very clear to me already when founding Wooga that at one point we need to have an exit because we were 2 years after Zynga, Playfish, Playdom, and we realized the only way we have a chance to catch up is with investment. Organically, just from our bootstrapping, we have no chance to compete with these big guys. And therefore we knew we needed funding, and quite a lot of it early on. So half a year after, 8 months after founding Wooga, we got this €5 million investment. And we really worked towards that. Brain Buddies was a game to go viral, to attract investors, to then get this funding to finance the next 2 to 3 years. And when you get venture capital funding, there is an explicit contract you sign, and there's an implicit contract you make with the investor. Because venture capital investors, they are there for a maximum of 10 years, usually, right? It's usually this early stage venture capital investment is usually for a 5 to 10 year horizon. There may be exceptions, but that's typically the horizon. And they have a lot of rights from the contract, technically, but it's much more about this implicit contract. You should be aware within the next 5 to 10 years, this investor I just got on board, they have the goal to sell their stake in the company. Let's say they put in €5 million and they get 20% of the company. They want to sell these shares they have for tenfold or more. And the way to do that is typically you go public in the form of an IPO, or you sell to another company, or you go bankrupt. Those are the three most likely outcomes. There are some other scenarios where this early stage investor sells all of their shares to a late stage investor. But when you take venture capital funding, you should be aware that these three are the most likely outcomes. And I didn't know back in the day if I want to do this for the next 20 or 30 years or not. But I knew that the only way to have a chance to be successful is with venture capital investment. It came with this exit premise. And we dabbled with the idea of IPO, but we thought we were too small. I think at the point of exit, Wooga was maybe doing 80 million euros per year. Now, if you read the Playtika public stock reports and you read between the lines, you can read between the lines that Wooga probably is now doing 200 million a year and extremely profitable. So it became much, much more profitable after I left. But we thought, okay, that's too small, less than 100 million a year is too small for IPO. And we were getting to the end of this 10-year period. And what I had learned over those 10 years, that Wooga had a lot of cycles, success, but also downs and ups. Also, the market had a lot of ups and downs. There was a lot of hype before the Zynga IPO. After the Zynga IPO, it was impossible to sell your game company for the next 2 years. And one wisdom I got from John Vici, the PopCap founder, is your company goes in these cycles. And the market goes in these cycles, and you can only sell when both are at a peak or at a positive point. And if you miss, and this window may be a few months, or it may be 3 years, you don't know. If you miss the window, the next window may be 5 years away.
Yeah.
So we were at the end of 2018, and Wooga was 10 years old. I knew my venture capital investors would want an exit at some point. The market was consolidating very quickly, and back then we thought maybe we are too small alone. In hindsight, we would have been big enough alone, but back then we thought, we're probably too small to survive in this changing, consolidating market alone. I was really tired after 10 years, 7 years before that as a startup, and 10 years thereafter. I was really tired, and I knew if I sell, I probably need to stay for another 2 to 3 years. So then it's 20 years of high intense startup. If I don't sell now, maybe it's another 10 years. Is it even good for the company to stay on for me as a tired founder for another 10 years? And also employees had stock options, and about 15% of Wooga was owned by employees, 1.5. And they also want their money at some point. So all of these reasons contributed to this idea of, okay, we have a window now where a sale is possible. We don't know how long that window lasts. In hindsight, it would have lasted 3 more years, but we didn't know. And okay, we sell. And then we started a process with a banker. We talked to lots of companies, we talked to dozens of companies.
So it was proactive from you?
Yes, We made a decision in March of 2018 to sell before Christmas 2018.
And as you went starting the conversation with multiple possible buyers, what was important for you? If there were things like, I don't know how much, of course, when knowing you, I know that you do care about the sustainability of your company after you.
Yeah.
And what were the important things that you looked at that would guarantee that?
Yeah, it's not easy to find that out beforehand. My goal was to get to a maximum level of independence, as independent as possible, so that the Wooga culture could be preserved as much as possible, and that EA, for example, had a history of assimilating studios, especially in mobile and free-to-play, and they would vanish within 2 or 3 years because the corporate integration was too strong and it killed the young studio. So there were certain companies we actually didn't want to sell to because they had a bad history, and some companies had a good history. So I also talked to companies they had acquired. And in the end, it's the people who make the decisions, right? In the case of Playtika, it was Robert Undercole, the founder of Playtika, and then you need to ask yourself, okay, this is the person making the decision and deciding on the fate of your company post-acquisition. How long will that person be there? If it's a manager working for a corporate, maybe they're fired next month, right? Or they make their next career move. And so if you sell to a big corporate, you need to basically talk to multiple people to get a feeling for what does this corporate want to do with my startup. And in the case of Playtika, it was Robert as the founder who I thought was unlikely to leave. And then obviously you don't have endless choice, right? You typically don't have 10 options you could select to. In our case, it was 3. And I basically came to this point of, okay, do I really want to sell, right? Because we had gone through this process now for 6 months with a banker and with advisors and with all of this. Do I really want to sell? Yes or no? And if yes, which of these 3 offers do I want to take? And in the end, I thought Playtika was a good fit because we would benefit from their experience in live operations and their mindset, how to scale games to a bigger scale, to a bigger level, which I think actually was true because we were thinking too small back then. We were thinking of how a team has to be small and nimble. And they had this 300 people working on one game. And they were right that a team like June's Journey should be bigger, that 100 people should work on a game like June's Journey. And they had live ops experience that we benefited from, and I had the belief they would mostly leave us alone. So obviously I'm not there anymore. I stayed on for 1.5, 2 more years. I felt during the time when I was there, obviously there were things I was unhappy with, but overall I think Playtika was really the right choice for Wooga. Obviously there are always changes and some things you wish were different, but I think Playtika is a good acquirer, or was a good acquirer for Wooga.
Yeah, and like you said, in the end, if we look purely objectively on the numbers, the growth of the company, at least in terms of revenue, before and after acquisition.
Wooga is more successful than it has ever been.
Yeah. And that's something that in M&A, a successful one, at least we can say, is like, does it grow value for the company acquired and also for the acquirer, of course.
I think from Playtika's perspective, we are one of the best acquisitions.
Yeah.
Maybe not the best, but one of the best acquisitions they have made in the last in the history.
And like knowing the games that were super successful, like Jens Journey at the time, benefiting from the whole platform of like growth that Playtika has, I think this, like at least on the product level, a really good match, like ramping up basically the game.
I think some people at Playtika had this idea that their technology would make, like their technology platform, their software would make a bit difference. I have no idea how it is today because I'm sure it has developed further, but integrating technology is always hard. The biggest benefit to the growth of Wooga was the mindset. So having this close collaboration with people at Playtika who said, no, you need to put more attention to live ops. You need to have multiple events per day instead of one event per month. You need
so pushing the limits, basically.
You need to scale this team. 30 people is not enough. You need to have 100 people. You need to put out more content. You need to have more live operations. You need to have better analytics. You need to have more features. You have a hit, double down on it. This mindset of this constant reinforcement, I pushed back against that for at least 6 to 9 months until I let go. And that made the big difference. It was about that. It was not about some technology software you plug into our systems.
It's a good learning as well, like with a close collaboration and mindset, because it's people-to-people work, right? Very hard to do a shift, especially in integration of technology, especially for a company at a scale of 200, 300 people. It's really hard. All right, it was, I feel like I've been traveling as well with Wooga, the past, the present, and the future. And I had a few last questions to close our conversation today. And one question of reflection for you, looking back now, thinking back of Wooga. What is your biggest regret as a CEO or founder at Wooga when you think back of Wooga?
Well, obviously my lack of decision, lack of constraint at the end of 2013 to say, hey, we are really a casual games company and we can start some experiments in other genres. That's what I should have done instead of lack of decision. And that led to 3 years of crisis and disappointed employees and layoffs and so many things. So that is the biggest regret, because I knew better at the time and I didn't have the guts to make an unpopular decision. Because the desire from many people in the company was, hey, we want to do all of these things. I felt it was wrong, but I didn't want to hurt the feelings of these people by telling them, no, you will not do all of these other genres, and if you are not happy with that, maybe another company is better for you. I didn't want to make people short-term unhappy, and I made hundreds of people long-term unhappy.
What is your biggest pride about Wooga?
That there are so many game companies now in Berlin and such an intense network of former Wooga employees who apparently are happy and created a number of game companies here in Berlin from their experience at Wooga.
Among a few, I have to mention them because I still love to meet them often. Tatiana, who is also the lead on Jelly Splash, founded Playpak. Auntie, of course, Starberry Games. And Florian as well was doing the merch, Travel Town.
Wilhelm Österberg, who did a game quite similar to Warlords, but now is successful.
Yes, as well. So, the Wooga alumni, and also we started the studio at Voodoo as well a few years later with some Woogas. So it has continued the spirit.
And there are some game companies who are not public, kind of who are still working in secrecy, like Patrick McGrath and Mullet Games, and
I know all
and
of
there are some others who I think don't talk publicly yet about having started or having started working.
Yeah, and we do know each other, so we are quite well connected, and that's I think that's really beautiful that continue after. And my last question. Okay, now you have built a company, you made your dream of entrepreneurship, you exited the company. What's your focus today after all that ride?
So I left Wooga exactly 3 years ago, and I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I will all my life, I will stay close to entrepreneurship no matter what my role is. I was an entrepreneur in a startup, I was a founder of a startup. At the moment I'm an investor in startups, so I'm an angel investor. I'm actually not doing game investments at the moment because I want a different mindset for a start, and I've invested into just a handful of companies, 5, starting next Monday, 6. And I work quite closely with most of them, really spending, in some cases, multiple hours per week per company, working closely with them, trying to help them, give them advice. So that's what I do at the moment. And I don't know yet what the next few decades, hopefully I have a few more decades of life, what the next few decades will bring, but it will be in startups, it will be based in Berlin. I don't know if I will start another company again or some other role in entrepreneurship and startups.
All right. I'm sure we'll see you in some way or another in games or, like in the Berlin and the Wooga network, yes. And but reminds me as well, we should definitely do a Wooga get together as well with you after this interview.
That would be fun.
Because I will share in my network. Thanks a lot, Jens, for the time today and sitting in the garden, sharing like the wisdom of a decade at Wooga.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. I am growing a community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders because we have so much more we can learn from each other. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate the show on Spotify or your other favorite podcast platform. It will help other growing leaders to discover the show and benefit from the valuable insights. If you would like to grow rapidly your leadership skills, you can find more insights on riseandplay.io, where you will also find my free masterclass on conscious leadership and other resources that I offer. Have a great week and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time,